Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a master of land, sea, and forest, able to shape them to his whims.
Tim Longo.
You must be some kind of ranger. You're a land and forest and sea ranger?
Well, yeah, but rangers don't shape. They just protect. They don't shape. They just let the wilderness be.
You're more of a druid.
No, well, I guess druids do shape, but they're different. SimCity is the opposite of what rangers
rangers or druids
would involve.
That is very true.
Yeah, it is leveling. The number of times I accidentally leveled or did some terrain manipulation where complete neighborhoods were destroyed because I lowered the land below where, it's like pretty hilarious. But.
Yep, I did that myself actually once. I was trying to okay, let me flatten this spot out so that I can put a water pump here, which, we'll get to.
Yeah.
And just being lost as far as what was going on and why they weren't. I've got all these pipes. Why will not the spice flow? And I'm just dying and trying to figure it out, and accidentally created a pond, where a house had been.
Yeah, same thing. So, I created a lake where a hospital used to be.
Expensive mistake. Those poor patients. Yeah, oh my God. Yeah. So it was basically Katrina.
Yeah, it was bad.
No. You are the natural disaster in your city.
Of course, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. That
God game. I mean, yeah.
Yep. Well,
sort of. Meta commentary, but anyway. Mm-hmm. The mayor is the real,
Yeah, the mayor.
All-powerful mayor.
Mayor McGee's.
Yeah.
So, I guess we want to start with just kind of how we're dealing with our cities, I think. Just sort of talk. I'd like to talk just at a high level. How do you approach... what's your just sort of general strategy? What are you doing in a session of play, moment to moment or whatever?
Yeah. Well, it's different. So for Gotham 1, it's different than for Gotham 2.
Sure.
Of course. So Gotham 1 lasted to 1915, and then I was in such a deficit and things are just falling apart. And so I decided to abandon it. And that one was very much a trial and error, just toy, like we talked about, just messing around, trying to figure out what everything's doing. So I'm not obviously surprised. The second one with Gotham 2, from a high level, I guess my approach is a couple things. One, it is more closely watching the budget screen, the budget panel, and manipulating the numbers there in a more intentional way. Because in Gotham 1, I was everything was at 100%, my taxes were, I didn't manipulate them too much. I wasn't using ordinances very much. And obviously during Gotham 1, I figured out some of what all this stuff was.
Yeah, ordinances is just, I've heard of ordinances before, but never in SimCity, so I didn't know that was a thing. So I'll have to figure that out.
Yeah, well, so that's where you can do income tax and sales tax, for instance.
Okay.
And then obviously that has certain impacts on happiness of people, apparently, because there's one of the advisors talks to you about well, you should probably...
It's far too soon to institute an income tax. I mean, when did we institute the income tax in the United States?
I don't know. When did we? You're the history buff here.
I know.
Oh, okay.
I feel like it was in the.
Oh, it was pretty late? I didn't know that, actually.
Oh, no. The federal government did the first one to pay for the Civil War. So there you go.
Oh. Yeah. Oh boy. Well,
but the modern tax code is more recent than that. So, yeah. Yeah.
Well, I went straight into income tax. So 1900. So, and then the other two variables I use are basically, so what the advisors are sort of talking about, and then, or three variables. And then I use the RCI bars pretty heavily. I'm kind of trying to min-max those. Right. And then the last one, to be honest, which I kind of call the San Francisco method, is because I very specifically choose locations on the terrain that have some sort of like, not constraint, but like boundary or like
feature
that sort of forces me to think differently about how I'm going to lay stuff out. So it's not just a flat plain. So I'm kind of in this little valley that's right next to a river, and so like I'm building in the valley, and then there's hills surrounding this city. And so when I go into the hills, it's a very specific intentional build. But I like that constraint, and the reason I call the San Francisco method is because we lived there for many years. It's kind of like what feels good to me. Like what, it's like, oh, this is maybe the hospital's here, and then I can build a community around that. And then maybe the museum's over here, and I can, or the college rather is here up on this hill. And then I'll build, residents around. So I'm kind of like trying to like bring some of my own aesthetics into it, for better or worse. But it ends up looking fairly haphazard, right? Because there's really not a lot of logic. I'm just kind of trying to build like one of everything, and then keep the RCI going, and then try to stay in the black.
Right. Okay. All right. That's cool. I mean, so one thing that I recognize there is definitely like trying to stay in the black. I look at the budget screen, but I basically, I spent my way out of water shortages. Water shortages were the real thorn in my side for the first decade. It just like, I couldn't figure it out. And I'd look at the pipes thing and I'd be like, well, I got all these pipes, and
so were they not flowing with water? Is that what you're?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. There was like more than half of them were gray, and it would say, and it was like every newspaper was like, water's the huge issue. And then the other things would be like my unemployment was really, really low. So actually, one of the things I look at is the neighboring cities. There's like a little neighboring cities thing, and it's like I have way more people than anybody near me. Like by a factor of 4. Like the other towns near me are like slowly growing. They're like 1,300, and I'm over 5,000. People living in my little Thermopolis, and
brother.
And the town is really expanding for people, and I've been adding services. Or I did I basically built off the tutorial as I just continued with it. But I have a fire station. I have a police department. I have a couple water towers. I just put in a hospital and a school. I'm kind of slowly building up that sort of stuff. And then, I've been building out more electrical grid, and then finally got the water underway. But what ends up happening is to get all that working and going, I had to like get to a point where I'm like, okay, I really just need to spend myself all the way down basically to zero. Raise taxes a little bit so I have something to play with next year, because you basically just get money once a year. And then I basically would, I would respond to whatever the top crisis is. It might be like, okay, water's a problem again, or like there was a hospital need or whatever. And I would put those things down. And then with anything left over, as the year was drawing down to an end, I'd look at that RCI grid and be like, which is residential, commercial, industrial, like sort of demand, and build out more of that. I've sort of speculatively built out some other stuff like a seaport, and just in case, and things like that. Just was like, well, I'll put a few tiles down of this. It's not a huge part of my city by any means. And I don't know how big it should be. Like I have can you zone something not next to water as a seaport? I have not read that far in the manual. So yeah, the water thing was a huge stress for a long time for me, and I'm like, I'm on a river and I'm having water problems. What is going on? And it's just like, I don't understand I didn't understand. I think a lot of my water pumps didn't have electricity, but I couldn't tell that on that screen, you know, so I just was like a little lost as to why I had all those problems. And I've sort of been growing out. Originally, it was just residential and industrial. And then, you know, in 1 year, I just was like, okay, now we're going to build a big commercial district, you know, on the northeast edge of the city, and just like lay all that down, you know, a whole bunch of tiles, like 4 or 5 by like 8. I tend to build in kind of big groups. I'll run a road around the outside of it, and, you know, see what happens. And that's kind of where I get. So
how do you,
interesting.
What are your, so when you say like a hospital is needed or something like that, how do you get, is it the newspaper that you use to understand?
Usually the newspaper is guiding that for me. Yeah.
I turned the newspaper off at some point because it was too irritating. Just always pop up all the time, and I probably should turn it back on, but I'm wondering if it's just sort of equates to the advisors anyway.
I think it equates to what's going on that page and asking the advisors what they think. Maybe, you know, maybe not. I mean, maybe they're ahead of the populace. Maybe they're, you know, so you might actually be doing better in that regard. You know, you might be able to ask people, but on the other hand, it might also be like your advisors are always going to ask for things, you know, so I want to know what the people want.
Right. Yeah. Well, they can be content, sort of like Civ, you know, Civ advisors, where they say, nope, you're good, everything's fine. Yeah. Like police and fire, right? It's like, yeah, our crime rate is at the national average, we're fine, or fire. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know what.
I do really like that, because my unemployment is so low. That means my wages are high, that I've got lots of people who want to live there. So I've got lots of residential land. I mean, that's just neat. Yeah. You know, it's just like you said with the ant farm. It's just like, oh, cool. You know, it's just, you know, like all these people are coming here because I've got these conditions that really benefit them, you know, and it's like, see capitalism benefit the worker, and your city will prosper.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. Yeah. On the water thing, like, I don't actually know exactly how it works either, but the two things that I ended up discovering through trial and error, because I'm not reading the manual or doing the tutorials, were frustrations in that I think there are times when pipes aren't connected when you think they are, you know, to the gray kind of grid. And then the second one is I probably could do one of the help text things to find this out, but maybe you read it in the manual. I assume that water pumps can only service a certain area. So I kind of peppered them around a little bit for more capacity or something, not really knowing what that area of capacity is. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
But I like have them like through each district or something. So there's always some pump going on. But yeah, then electricity has to happen. But it, you know, it's, despite the mystery behind it, I do remember this from playing back in the day as well, that I don't know, it's not that it's mind blowing, but I just always loved the idea of like looking at the pipe grid and like almost like the city up top. It's like you're kind of min-maxing the pipes, you know, and like laying them out almost like a mini game, you know. And then I'm probably going to be going to Gotham 3 soon, to be honest, because I actually want to focus more on public transportation, and I want to get subways going, which impact your pipes, I think, because you obviously they occupy the same space, I think. And so because subways, I think, are kind of a big milestone for the game too. So I wanted to kind of think ahead on that, but I guess you can just destroy pipes and then build that way too if you need to. But you definitely seem like you're able to think through sort of like the district size and the min-maxing of that in a lot more methodical way.
I more just was like, well, here's the shape of the river. Let's just throw down a big long swath of this and a big long swath of that, you know, and you know, it wasn't calculated in any way. And I didn't really think of any, like, I don't think it represents any city I've ever been in either. You know, so it's also weird from that perspective, because I do think that there are probably some economies of scale in the in the sort of the zoning sizes. Like there's probably a good size, and
there is for sure.
I have no idea what that is. Like,
I think there's a ratio the min-maxing ratio that there's like whatever, like 2 to 1 to 3 or something. You know what I mean? Like,
sure. Yeah.
And then you put a road around that, and then you build another one, and then you put a road around it.
Right.
It's like that kind of thing.
And the next thing you know, you've got Houston,
Yeah, right. So. Yeah, well, and I mean, I'll get to I think it sounds like it'll get to another topic of sort of like the megacity thing. But yeah, I mean, and my San Francisco thing wasn't necessarily meant to be that I'm emulating San Francisco. It was more of just San Francisco, from having lived there for many years, and then kind of knowing, I mean, it's like a lot of old, I mean, it's not that old compared to Europe, but it's, old cities where you can clearly see from a sitting planning perspective that it was built over a long period of time. Cause there's places that just don't make sense, right? It's like, you would never do this. They just did it cause that's where the hill was, or that's where whatever was, so it's like that kind of growing, which I think the game does sort of simulate in an interesting way. It's like, well, okay, we're out of space. We need more residential. I'm surrounded by hills. I guess I'm building houses in the hills, so then you build roads up to the hills, and you've created the Oakland Hills, it's like, that sort of analogy. But I don't think it looks like anything specifically. I just more the toy aspect of the game, like it similar to what we talked about with Civilization. It's not the one more turn thing per se, but there is this element for me of just the toy aspect of it, and just the Lego aspect of it, where I'm just fooling around, and I just like nitpicking aesthetically how the thing looks, like, where the main thoroughfare is, and on, and where the pumps are, and putting like, it's sort of just aesthetically pleasing, like having the college be sort of like a central point of the, or the hospital or whatever. And like the way it kind of just aesthetically looks is probably not efficient clearly because my transportation manager guy's been yelling at me about having too many roads already. So, he seems to be grumpy all the time, but, unless, so anyway, it's just, I've surprised myself at how many minutes and now hours go by where I'm just like making something look the way I want it to look,
yeah, that's cool.
Which is fun. I mean, it's, it's that, I don't know, erector set kind of feel. Lego is a good example. But then it's also, there's the sim running on top of it. So like you put stuff together and you're either rewarded or punished for your decisions about aesthetics because sometimes, your aesthetics are not a good idea. So for at least, your budget or something.
Right. Yeah. You gotta be able to pay for what you want.
Yeah.
If you can't pay for it, that's a problem. That's it's a recipe for deficit spending. And, you can't do that. You're not allowed by the states. So, although you can, I think in SimCity run at a deficit, can't you?
I did for many years. I don't know what happened. I don't know if that eventually stops or not. Yeah, that's a good point. But then I guess there is a mode, right, where you can just kind of just put as much money in as you want and just kind of play.
Oh, sure. Yeah. There's definitely some things like that. I mean, I don't know why he's screaming about your subway in 1910.
Oh yeah. Well, I don't even have train tracks yet. You know what I mean? So I'm thinking okay. I'm assuming he wants more train. Well, all he really said was I have too many roads. So I don't know what that is in sort of relation to, like because obviously you can have a whole city with roads at some point. So it must be like based on my population, I have too many roads, you know what I mean? Or something like that. Yeah. I don't know for sure, but the other funny thing about him as an advisor, like all the rest of them were pretty content because I was trying to manage my budget. So I pretty quickly knocked everything down to like 10% budget or something because I wanted to save some money. Nobody really complained at the beginning, and still most of them are complaining as long as I had a police station, as long as I had a hospital, etc., college. But the transportation guy was yelling from the beginning, and he didn't stop yelling until I raised his budget to 100%. He would not even tolerate 90% budget. Any
well,
cut.
you know, if you're in 1910, you're talking about a lot of wooden wheels still, you know, probably still some horses. You got to be repairing those roads all the time. You need that budget.
There are definitely no horses happening. There are cars running around. Yeah, but yeah, it's just, we talked about this last time, and this isn't something that I would have even thought about playing it as a player back in the day when it came out. But I just find myself not scrutinizing, but asking myself at least what, if any, commentary they are like embedding, even if it's not, they're not self-aware about it, you know, maybe subconscious or what the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
Even if it's not conscious or subconscious, but there's like the fact that the transportation guy yells at you, like, and it's all in caps. Like he says something, you're going to regret this or something. Like if you go below 100%.
I do think that transportation is fundamental, is one of those things that is like an understood issue in America, in that if you build more roads, you will need more roads. Like,
yeah, it's a slippery slope.
It's chasing a dragon. You know, you're like, I'm going to widen this highway. And it's like, oh, well, you know what? It's just, in fact, you need more lanes the next day.
Yeah,
like as soon as you open a wider highway, it's like, it is filled. And that is like one of the true things about sort of urban and suburban dynamics in the United States, is like, if you put in more roads, more people, you will need more roads. And that is literally coded into this game. I will say.
That's fair. No, that's fair. And then maybe that is a good, accurate way for them to approach it then. It's something we haven't learned from Europe.
Right.
Or something like that, right? That it's like we're too young, we're stubborn, and too selfish.
Well, and also America, you know, built the automobile industry, you know, around an interstate highway system in the like 40s and 50s or whatever, and like it became this freedom, and like
that's what I mean. Yeah, that's where the selfish
advertising get involved. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and when it comes to cities, like one of the things I was so tangential, but one of these things I watched not that long ago was like a 20-minute thing about like a documentary about how Europe deals with car accidents and how the States deal with car accidents.
Oh.
And in Europe, when a car accident happens, it's like, okay, we need to look at the space and understand why this accident happened. And in the and it's like, okay, well, maybe if we put in one of those things where there's the cement thing in the middle of the road, I forget what those are called, like where you have to slow down because it like narrows, because there's like a little island for like a pedestrian to stop at, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I just had one installed in my neighborhood, and I think it's just to slow down traffic on this road. And we also have speed bumps and things like that in a lot of the residential areas where I live. But they'll be like, you know what it is? We have too long of a straight path here. So we need to put something to break that up so people can't get up to speed, and cause that accident. And here it's like,
it's litigious.
Well, I drove off the road. Yeah, we got to sue somebody, and it's a very different...
And insurance-based, right? It's like insurance.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
Like insurance
and then
we're
all sharing the burden of the cost of the way we do business, which should be way lower than it is. Not to mention how much money that sucks out of the public sector as a mechanism of depriving the middle class of gaining further wealth. Okay. Now I'll just step off of that soapbox. Thank you. Thank you, box of ivory. But it is
But I think you said it was tangential, but I don't think it's tangential. I think that as much as Will Wright and the team say that this game is about a toy and player agency, etc., it's sort of like, it's the whole, man. Maybe we are on a tangent, but I'm about to sort of like. I think I've said this on the podcast before, but it's my frustration with publishers. Well, I won't say publishers or developers. I'll just say with game makers who claim that their games are not political.
Oh yeah,
and I just think it's impossible for that to be the case.
Oh my God! Did you open that can? There's worms everywhere.
Yeah. Anyway, so the worms are everywhere. But I guess my point is, it's similar to this. It's like, you're making a simulation of a city game, and yes, there's certain like preconceived notions about how to do that and how to balance that and how to code that, etc. But at some point, you have to make subjective decisions about how the game is built that will inevitably have some sort of statement related to them. It's just inevitable. I mean, you know, and so I love that this supposedly simulation-based game where the power is in the player's hands is causing a debate that we're not a debate, but a discussion that we're having about, the insurance industry in America or something, and I think I think he would be proud of that, even though I don't think he would overtly ever say that was the goal,
right?
To cause debate.
Well, I do think simulations are meant to be thought-provoking in the sense of like, well, what if you tweaked this variable? Like that's always what you're doing with a simulation is when you're building it is like, okay, well, let's tweak this thing. What if we tweak it? I mean, you're doing that with all of game development, but in a simulation, it's like all these systems interrelate, and you can sort of see like, oh, if you do that, I mean, there's like that's what undergirds the simulation hypothesis, like that we're in a reality that is a simulation, right? Is that, like, somewhere out there's infinite computation, and therefore there are more simulations than there are realities, and therefore we're probably a simulation. And and it's like if you just tweak the numbers a bit, like you see what happens next, right? And you just kind of tweak them and tweak them and tweak them until you get the one you want. But that if your goal is, what is your goal with this game? Like, is your goal to frustrate the player if they with certain approaches to play? And this is kind of getting into procedural rhetoric, which I think I mentioned certainly off air last episode. I can't remember.
No, you did mention it on air a little bit. Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, I know explicitly that this game, as we've been talking about, is making an argument procedurally. It's like it is procedurally presenting rhetoric, which is too many highways are bad. Like, and that is a pretty agreed upon thing. I don't think it's I don't think that it is. I mean, it's meant to spur, putting more money into public transit, where supposedly if you put in $1, you get 5 out. In terms of like all kinds of metrics, but basically like, you can support a lot more, and it's easier to maintain because it's just the one thing. And it's all very expensive, but it's also, it returns a lot. Whereas cars really don't. There are really not a lot of good arguments for the.
It's individualism, right? I mean, cars are only individualistic, really. Yeah. I mean, it's a.
Yeah, and I think that this is not the only place where it's making its procedural arguments, and I actually think that one is pretty well founded when you're talking about at least American patterns of development. We go too fast. Most of our roads are meant to be straight, whereas actually more curvy roads are better because they cause you to drive slower, which means that you can't build things as far apart because it would take too long to get places. So there's more of a sense of community. Like there's a lot of stuff that goes into that sort of stuff, but this actually just deals with if you build roads, they'll want you to build more roads. There's a very surface level.
The maintenance of it really more. It seems like they focus on more of like the upkeep or something than anything else.
Or just the use. I mean, it just means like the more roads you have, the more people you're going to have using those roads, and you're going to need more roads. And that's literally an argument the game makes, which is a true thing in America. So
do you know, have you noticed, or do you know, like when traffic shows up, it's, for me at least, it's only in certain places on the road. It's like not on all of the roads. And have you seen that? Is that happening to you, or is it just cars? Or
I've not been paying a lot of attention to traffic because right now the next thing I'm going to have to tackle is smog. I'm having smog problems.
Oh, really? So, interesting. Yes. I have had no pollution problems, but but I'm not sure why. So one theory though is that,
I did build a coal plant. Did you build a coal plant?
Well, I did, but so because of that valley that I have, I built the coal plant on the other side of the mountains or the hills, and then I ran the electricity over the mountains to the town, so it's completely separate from everything else. It's like on its own in like the desert. So
that would do it.
That
the
might
further away
that
you
might
can build
do
them,
it.
the better.
Yeah,
for sure.
I mean, it probably cost me to do that, but and Lord knows I'm now going to be out of money soon. But anyway, yeah, I did make a conscious effort to. I didn't know if that was supposed to be a true thing, but it felt like so.
No, I think it is. I do think that that was definitely, that's an experience I remember. I built mine a ways out of town, but not like really far out of town. But I do remember that being a thing back when I played it.
Well, I wonder if the hills are helping me too, to have the hills in between it. And I wonder if they model any of that out, but yeah.
Wouldn't surprise me. I don't know. I mean, I don't think they're actually like modeling where the smog will go, but
the other funny,
I don't know what the prevailing winds are. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like if it's,
yeah,
like for me, I'm like, well, where I put it, oh, maybe I've got north wrong. Like I don't think it actually distinguishes, but I've been using the same view almost all the time. I sometimes tweak it. I sometimes turn it just to see, like, get another view on where I'm putting a building down and then turn it back. So I'm always actually looking at the city from the same perspective because that's what I think of as like northeast, southwest. And then I'm like, well, I put the coal plant east of town, so that prevailing winds in the U.S. generally will move from west to east.
Oh my gosh! Oh, you literally meant prevailing winds. Okay.
Yeah, no, I literally meant like, that's well, funny. For me, like I would put it over here because that's going to be, but that's probably not modeled in this early version.
It's probably just distance or something. Or
it's probably something simple.
The funny thing about mine is it dawned on me late last night when I was finishing the session, so I didn't really spend any time doing anything about it. But the model for the coal plant has like little cars built into like the parking lot, into the art. And I have no road that goes out there. It's just by itself. And then I have the
live in their
car. I have the electricity going from, the only thing leaving the plant is the electrical wires. And so I'm like, wow, those poor people, they live at the plant and work at the plant, I guess. But nobody's complained about it so far. So I guess I'm going to stick with it. But see, that's a good example of the aesthetics for me because for me, when I realized that, it dawned on me, I was like, oh, shoot, there's no way to get to the plant for the workers. There's no reason for me to care about that. Nobody's told me I have to do it. There's no metrics that tell. But for me, I'm like, no, for the city to actually be complete and work, I need to build a road out there so they can get to work. Yeah. And it probably will actually cause more problems if I do that because this road will be long. It'll go over these hills. It's going to be complete pain in the butt to maintain.
You know what you should do? You should make a train track going off the map and bring your workers in from outside.
Oh, you can do that?
I think that is implicit in the modeling, is that if something...
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I did. Well, I ran out of money to do it, but I did. Part of my solution was to start building my train tracks, especially because the dude was yelling at me to do so. So I'm trying to build like a commuter line out there and through the whole town of train.
I love it.
Tracks.
In like 1920, you're building commuter lines.
Yeah,
it's awesome.
Yeah.
I want to point out that the subway system in Washington, D.C., which is the nearest subway system to where I live, was started building in 1967. So,
well, no, I'm not building.
I know it's not by any means the oldest subway system in the United States or certainly the world. But I just think it's funny because I'm like, I remember coming here in the 80s, like with my family and us riding the metro and how amazingly clean it was. It's actually still pretty clean, believe it or not. But at the time, it was like known for being clean in like 1983 or 4 or whatever it was when we came down here.
Yeah, I rode BART as a kid from San Francisco to Oakland to
and it's actually pretty clean too. Actually.
And to Concord. Yeah. I mean BART. Yeah, it's been around for a long time too. But yeah, I think the subway stuff is pretty expensive, so I don't think I'm going to be building that anytime soon. But yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know if we want to shift topics to get to.
It's fine. We've been just
we're all
tangent upon. We're all over
no
the
pun
place.
Intended,
we have some topics. We're off. We're not even on the same map as where we started. So we're good.
But I do think it's all relevant to your point on procedural rhetoric. I think I haven't. I mean, obviously, I'm not. I haven't done exhaustive research of interviews with him or anything. But I do, by the way, have a sub point to bring up that I didn't bring up in pre-show that I want to mention about him in interviews.
Why do we even take down notes?
No. Well, I just knew this is one of those things where if it comes up, I'll find a spot. If it doesn't, I can do it next time. So that's why I didn't mention it in pre-show. But it came up, so I'm going to mention it. So I don't know, maybe he said this before, but to your point on procedural rhetoric, I feel like, again, and The Sims actually is probably another good example of this. As we talked about last episode, has become the phenomenon that it is. But I feel like he and probably the team are very intentional about the commentary they're modeling in, but they're never going to talk about it from a PR perspective. Right, it's never going to be a talking point when they're selling the game to the public or to their audience. It's going to be something that's in there that because I think when you're playing SimCity or when you're playing a sim game like this, generally you want your audience to be sort of oblivious to that commentary. You just want them to simulate the sim, and have fun and fool around, and then maybe through the course of it, they pick up some of that sort of commentary on roads or whatever it is, and it makes you think. Because I remember back in the day when it had been released and I was playing it as a player, one of my goals was I don't think I achieved this because I was never great at the game, but one of my goals was a completely roadless, I was living in San Francisco at the time, working there, going to school there, and I love the idea of a city without roads, and so I would constantly bang my head against the wall trying to make a, and some of it was, them pushing me in that direction, and then some of it was my own goals in life. But anyway,
no, I mean, I think it's actually really powerful for them not to say, because if they come out and say it, it feels subjective.
Yeah.
If the game just does it, it feels objective.
Yeah.
And it's like it makes a more powerful argument for itself if you don't describe what you're doing.
That's so tricky.
And that's I don't know that was deliberately manipulative.
No,
I'm not
I don't
accusing
mean
anyone of that.
No,
but it is a thing that it's like, as an argument, it's a much more powerful argument if you don't sort of take the moment to think, yeah, but they set it all up so that it would make this argument, right? It's like when you build up any kind of argument, the more you can kind of make it seem inevitable, the more powerful that argument feels.
Yeah.
And
when you,
yeah.
When you call
and then
a
what
game,
you need is, go ahead.
When you call a game SimCity, you take it at its word.
We're just simulating a city.
You're simulating a city. Oh, sure. Yeah, this is all just science.
Exactly.
I was like, nope,
right.
It's not science. It's
right. And what whenever you're making an argument, what is required of the reader to see through the fact that they've kind of led you down the primrose path is a vaster knowledge, right? You have to have actually read all the source material and all the people who disagree with the source material. Like, as a philosophy undergrad, like that is what we were doing all the time, is like you read some continentalist and then you read some British guy and they have, and you have to have the whole perspective to understand that, like, this guy's not telling you the full story of what's going on in philosophy at the time, and neither is this guy, and yet they're still arguing with one another, right? And but they're each just kind of like, I mean, they're not doing. I mean, sometimes you'll find a straw man, you'll be like, that's a straw man, right? And that, like, all these things that guys who spend too much time on the internet will like point out to people, like, it's like, what, I'm just saying a thing. You don't have to tell me how that my assumptions are invalid or whatever. Like, go away. Anyway, but point being, like, you have to have a lot more context than you're going to get from the game itself, or from an argument itself, in order to understand what it's doing. And what it has left out, and things like that. The best philosophers tend to directly engage their critics, and say, well, so-and-so says this, but here's why I think he's wrong, or she's wrong. So, it's a whole, and that's how argument progresses, and that's totally fine. Like, I wouldn't even accuse them of anything. It's just like, this is their statement, and go make your own. Like if you want to make a European SimCity, that argues for
there is right.
Fewer. Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
City Skylines is probably more that.
Well, I think there's literally a Euro one that is published by. Yeah. Anyway, I forget who. Maybe it's more of a Civ thing. No, I think it's Anno. It's called Anno something, right? Anyway.
Oh, Anno. Yeah, Anno is that one that they always have to add up to 9 or something like that.
Yeah, it's but very popular. But yeah, I maybe a different tactic. But
it's a different sort of game because it actually simulates Europe in a lot of different eras.
Yeah, it's more right. It is. It's not a modernist. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but I mean, it is a funny. Yeah, no, I love. It's your point is excellent because it's like it just, though probably not super intentional, it just cracks me up that there sort of is a hidden philosophy in a sim game that is, it's not, again, I agree with you, I'm not trying to say that they're being subversive with it, but it just never would have dawned on me, to think about it that way, but it is happening. Like it is in there. You have to look for it and maybe you have to force it a little bit. So, it's maybe it really wasn't their full intention, but, I guess as soon as
they may have just been bringing their own understandings of cities that they lived in. I mean, they were near San Francisco at the time, right? Which, as you pointed out, had BART and also Caltrain, I guess, as two different things supporting the city. Caltrain, I forget what it's called, but.
Yeah, Caltrain. No, Caltrans is the
okay.
They're the workers, the maintenance group.
Okay.
Caltrain, but then there's also like all the city buses, right? Are pretty elaborate there,
right?
Too, yeah.
Which is Mooney.
Mooney.
Yeah, right. So there's
in the city.
Yeah, there's all these different sorts of things that are contributing to that. But like public transit is pretty viable in San Francisco. There's certainly traffic, but it's not like New York, where there's traffic and subways, and they're both mobbed. That's a city,
right? City, yeah, that's a weird example. Yeah, that's true. I don't know much about New York, but it is funny that traffic, the cars are a nightmare, and also, interesting. Maybe that's just overpopulation or something. But here's another clue, though, as a quick related aside. Before I turn the newspapers off. I was starting to log the headlines, the main headlines, and there's a lot of headlines in there. I don't know if you noticed, you probably did, but like here's an example I wrote down. Rioters destroy airbase at Panama Canal. Oh yeah.
There's stuff that I think is happening historically. I'm guessing because I had something about Zaire.
Yeah, but there's a lot of stuff from the Middle East. Now, was it? It's not happening in 1900. It's happening when the game is out in the 80s or 90s, right?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I didn't try to make any correlation there.
Well, I guess my point is like what I'm trying to relate this to any of their sort of side commentary or sort of inside commentary is that the newspaper headlines have a bent to them.
Okay, so Zaire. I didn't know anything about Zaire. Zaire was a Congolese state from 1971 to 1997. So yeah, in my 1916 newspaper, I don't think Zaire could have been having. I actually think that mine was not actually a war thing. It was more of a. I think it was referring to the Rumble in the Jungle, which I don't even think happened in Zaire. I don't actually remember.
But
but
there's also.
Actually
but I mean,
what it was talking about. Anyway,
right. So clearly that's not based on the time you started the year you started the game. That's based
Correct.
On. I guess my point is, people buying this game at this time will be reading these newspapers.
In Kinshasa. Yeah, it wasn't Zaire. That's exactly what I was talking about. Mine was something about. I can't remember what it said, but it was like Zaire and the second brawl. Maybe it said.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's talking about the Rumble in the Jungle. So it's like that happened in 1974, and my game is happening in 1916. At the time that newspaper comes out. So yeah, there's something weird there. Like,
well, they're choosing those headlines. Is my point, right? They're showing. it's like kind of like Civilization in a way, but it's like, I don't know, I guess. And been a few headlines that have dealt with like conflict there was one, I think, about oil in Kuwait, maybe. And so, but I mean, newspapers, I mean, we talked about this last time, right? Like journalists newspapers have a certain, usually have a certain stance, not, so I don't know. They're putting their personal signature.
You can pick two different newspapers too. One is,
I didn't know that.
There's one that, I think basically one's sort of like is the Times and one's the Post. Like one's a newspaper broadsheet and one's a tabloid.
Got it. Okay. All right. Yeah. So I didn't realize that. I just turned them all. I don't know which one it's on by default then, but it was just interesting.
The broadsheet is on by default.
Okay. Well, then that's the one that I'm. So one's maybe a little more tongue in cheek or something. But
I think it actually might be. I mean, it's interesting because I think tabloids are actually often more interested, at least on their front cover, on local politics, which is interesting. And I think broadsheets, and this is very broadly speaking, and also very far afield from the game, but I think broadsheets are often more outward looking. The Times, often above the fold, has got world events, especially if those are significant. Whereas the Post will then at the same time have like this I don't know, something that happened in the mayor's office.
Local hero.
No, not heroes, zeros. Always like, you got to focus on the fire, right?
Got it.
If it bleeds, it leads, or the scandal or whatever, you want to find that. That's the
okay. So I saw both of those. I mean, then maybe maybe both of them are on by default and they just alternate.
Yeah, it's possible. Yeah, it's possible. Okay. I have no idea.
Yeah. Interesting.
I also think that they probably didn't want to actually think up a whole timeline for the city of like what's going on in the world when you can start the game at 1900, 1950, 1970 and 80 or something like that. There's like 4 different years you can start in.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's just too much to ask of their
right. Yeah, agreed. No, I think it's a clever way to rip straight from the headlines, right, and then kind of rewrite it and repurpose it. I guess my only point is they still have to make a choice at what they're taking from the headlines, right, and then write about it. And so it's like, oh, interesting. So your rioters destroy airbase at Panama Canal, and it sort of had a bent of like, are the rioters might be right, kind of thing. To it,
Yeah,
so anyway.
I think that stuff to me feels like, somebody remembering world events. Keep in mind, like, no Wikipedia, like,
right.
It's like, what do you do? You just open you open an encyclopedia or a history book and you just like pick stuff out that happened every year.
Yeah.
And then you are at that sort of point, not really taking responsibility if that's how it was written.
Yeah.
Like, are you just kind of ceding that responsibility to wherever you're getting the information from? Like, I mean, that's a huge, complicated question.
They're over.
And again, like, I think a lot of players probably turn off the newspaper pretty fast. I actually turned mine up. I was getting more newspapers because you can set it to be basically like, by default, it's like when there's big news, and so it's like things are really bad, like things have really gotten out of whack in your city, basically. Or I can't remember. Oh, that's called extras. It's like extras mode is like less frequent, but it's like about the thing that's really affecting your
And then
city.
subscription, I think, is the other one.
And then, the other one is subscription. That's correct. Yeah. And I turned it to subscription just to be like, I wonder what that's like.
That's like weekly or something.
Yeah.
Interesting. So the going back to my point about like their intent, developer intent and developer commentary. I don't remember how I found this. Oh, it's in the main menu of the version I'm playing, which is, I think, like the deluxe game of the year or whatever, blah, blah, blah. There is before you start the game, there is an option that's called WillTV. Did you see that?
I did not notice it.
So, and I think there's probably like the editor and there's probably like the main game or what. I don't know what the rest of the options are, but there's one called WillTV. I was like, yes, please sign me up. What is this? And so I click on that, and it starts this little dialog box on the controls for WillTV, quote unquote. And you basically there's this little console that's done in like HyperCard or some nonsense, and or just coded in with these JPEGs or something, or these GIFs rather. And there's these buttons, and you press each of the buttons by using your arrow keys, I think, and then you hit spacebar, and it starts a movie, an interview with Will Wright. And they're super crushed down, you know, and its sound is terrible. You know, it's like 240 or something, or 480.
Yeah, sure.
And it's like super crunchy, but it's him sitting at his desk, and he's just answering these questions about what they're doing. And I only watched 2 of them. There's 4 of them. They are fascinating. He is talking about The Sims before The Sims was created. He's talking about multiplayer. He's talking about a universal data set where you can share the user-created content between the games.
Yep.
It is insane. And this is...
Which is Spore and The Sims.
Yes.
Spore, yeah.
And he's younger, you know, and...
Yeah.
And it's just like you're watching a mad professor... You know, and he already has that sort of affect of like neutrality, you know, like he's not like overly excited, but he's also not overly bored. He's like in the middle. Yeah. So it's like, so when he says something, you take it as truth. You're like, oh yeah, I'm convinced. Yeah, that sounds good. You should that's perfect. You should do that, because he's so like matter of fact about like important things. So I don't know. It's just like the whole experience was a time capsule, because it was like this HyperCard nonsense and these terrible like low res images of these buttons that you could just tell you would have been, you know, using on a CD-ROM back in the day. And then these terribly crushed videos of him sitting at his desk talking about fascinating things that was really predicting. I mean, I guess it would be at least 10 years prior to things like The Sims and stuff, you know. He was talking about
at least 10. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, very funny. Very
1993. That's
and he was talking about, like, for instance, network technology. Like, once network technology gets up to snuff, you know, we'll be able to actually, you know, play multiplayer SimCity game. You know, it's like he's talking about all this stuff, and it's like, oh, it's so good. So they're not that long. They're fascinating.
Oh, I'll totally watch those. Yeah. I totally missed that, so I will totally check that out. Historical note: in 1964, there were indeed riots in Panama City about control of the Panama Canal, and riots over flags, in particularly, and that is what caused us to make an agreement to relinquish the canal in 1999.
Yep. I will share something with you offline.
Okay.
About that, as you might guess.
I look forward to it. Okay. I guess we touched on utilities. We talked about trial and error. We did talk about bringing in your own assumptions.
There's one.
So the last thing is the automated evolution of the city. And I don't, you know, like, I haven't gotten to a point where I'm seeing that happening. So I think you need to at least set the table here.
Yeah.
And then I'll pull out the tablecloth.
Nice. Now, are you doing it like very fast, so all the dishes stay?
We'll see if it goes well, or if the dishes are everywhere. You know, it could go either way.
One of the best sight gags, physical comedy of all time. Okay, so I actually mentioned a small version of this last episode where the church just popped up miraculously, pun intended, in the middle of a residential district where I had not. Obviously, I have no control over that. It's just, and by the way, as opposed to the point I'm about to make, the church is still there. The church has not changed. However,
once they get in there with their tax-free land, Tim, man, it's hard to get them out.
Yeah, it's so fun. It's right on like a street corner. It's like on a corner of streets there, and it's like very dominant, and it's bugging the crap out of me, because that's not where I would have put. I probably wouldn't have put a church, but anyway. But then next, not far from the church, down in this row of residential zoning that I have, there's There's an area that I guess it might be high density, but but I don't remember which of the two it is. But so that might be part of the reason here. But started out as houses, right? Suburban, essentially small structures, houses, and then over time, it would what I mean, but the topic of the automated sim of it, that you don't have control, that indirect control, or just sort of like letting the sim go and you're just kind of tuning the knobs. The thing that's weird to me is, again, sort of like how they extrapolate progress, I guess, or like success. And so the example that keeps coming up is I have this section of that residential district that keeps being rebuilt in a new way. And so it started out as houses, like single family homes or something. Then it was built into an apartment, which was moving those all together. So that was, I guess, progress. And then it was built into condominiums, this high-rise condominiums of like 10 stories or 12 stories or something, in replacing the houses. So it's like, so again, I don't know if this is what their intent is, but to me as a player, I'm looking at it and I'm like, oh, so we want more condominiums and we want to maximize the space. I guess what it is, and that's where I made the joke, the Judge Dredd joke of megacities,
sure.
Or Blade Runner, another example, where it's like, no, you just go up. Every square foot is valuable and you put as many levels as you can on every square foot. And then I'm like, oh crap, is that how you win this game? You just build up, and by the time you're done, you just have megacities everywhere.
Well, where I ended up, my evolution of a building, one particularly, but because at a certain point I was like, hey, like, I'll be honest, I actually I might have a church. I don't really look at the buildings.
The church is really hard to miss, though.
Sure, but I am almost entirely focused on the things on the side. So like the budget thing opens up a window, but like it covers my city. So it's like I click on that and now I'm looking at the budget and I close it and I'm back over looking at there and in the upper left where it's like the current crisis.
Yeah.
And I don't really pay a lot of attention to what buildings were developed, but one thing that drew my attention was like, oh, look, there's a large gray building in the middle of my residential district.
Yep, condos.
And low-income housing.
Oh, interesting. Okay, well, that's okay then.
I mean, and then I'm like, well, what does that mean? Like,
yeah,
because those people aren't terribly happy.
Mm-hmm.
And there's, again, some procedural rhetoric. It's like, is that necessarily true? Like, because, I think of like the immigration experience in America where, a lot of people came in and were densely packed in New York because that's where the immigration center was, Staten Island and Ellis Island, all of that. Ellis Island, not Staten Island. Ellis Island. So they come in and then they're like in what we would call, I guess, tenements.
Yeah.
So they're really densely packed in. They're low-income housing. But there is like community there as well, right? And there are probably positives and negatives to that community. Because they're so densely packed, like all the walls are super thin. They're not very well built buildings. The frames are great, but the interior maybe not. And people are on top of each other. Everybody knows everybody's business. But of course, a lot of them came from villages where it's like, okay, they're maybe not as densely packed, but still everybody knows about everybody, right? So it's like, it's actually probably comforting in some ways because you're surrounded with people who speak your language, and like there's just this whole like there's a lot wrapped up in that. But like the evolution was like to a really nice apartment building, like from the low income housing I don't know, as my overall prosperity grew, it was like, oh, well, yeah, now you'd have to see that. And like having lived in Marin County, I'm like, well, yeah, of course, that makes total sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's,
so that's another assumption. It's like,
right.
A hidden assumption, in the sort of tech tree of a building, of a, high density, building.
Right. They had to build a tech tree and they had to make decisions about what the progression of that was. And the other thing is it seems to also,
and why
it also goes up and down too sometimes. Cause I think some buildings will turn into one thing and they'll go up to something else. And then they actually can go back to the other thing sometimes, I think.
Sure. Yeah. But I'm seeing that in my industrial district, so.
Right. But there is a bit of a commentary there that's related to the roads thing, right? Because it's like maximizing space in a world which I think is maybe a little bit more European and progressive thinking or something. If that's if that's the best word, of like, single family homes, which is very popular in the US, just like having your own car in the US is very popular. And single family homes, they're kind of saying that's not the end game. Those go away. People move in maybe initially, but then it's just kind of, taken over by condominiums eventually, which,
I mean, the thing that really stuck out to me was like, I only noticed it because it was ugly.
Yeah.
And that was the thing that made me, that was the thing that literally made me hit the query button and be like, well, what is this?
Yeah.
And go find out why is this the way it is? And then later that happened in the industrial district as well. But it was very troubling to me. I don't think I don't remember if the zoning was dense there. I don't think it was dense. I think most of it was in my original residential stuff. So it like kind of built up over time just because so many people, Thermopolis is thriving compared to the cities nearby. And so, we've got to find a place for all these people. And so we're just adding on to this building, I guess. But then it was like, it turned into a nice brick building that fit in with everything around it a lot more. And I was just like, that's also saying something, like, anyway, it definitely was like, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
yeah. I don't think the dishes stayed on the table on that one. I think the dishes were flown.
There's everywhere. The champagne flutes, there are no more. And with that, let's turn to email.
All right.
Let's have the email bubble up, as it were. These were, of course, sent to devgameclub@gmail.com. Sir, as is customary, I yield to you the first one. Let's hear it.
Okay, Megaman X examinations.
Megaman X
dash animations. Yep.
Yeah.
Calamity by Calamity Nolan. Hi, Calamity. Hello, Dev Game Club. Calamity Nolan here. A couple of us listeners. Is there a name for us? Clubbers, gamies, deviants?
No, deviants. Tim, deviants.
Deviants. Okay. All right. Deviants. Got it. Okay. Well done. All right. No, it went over my head. Played along with Mega Man X and skipped Mega Man 2 because that game is too hard. Well, you have Rewind probably. Unless you're playing Au Natural. It's been very fun sharing our observations throughout the process. I understand why you do a podcast about it. Here are a few too many words about my experience playing the game. I ended up playing through the game almost entirely twice. Wow. First, I got stuck on the last couple of Mavericks, Reploids. Depends on your region, I guess. And started over.
No, hold on.
Oh, okay. I thought they were named differently in.
Nope.
Okay.
All Mavericks are Reploids. Not all Reploids are Mavericks.
Ah, got it. Thank you for clarifying that, Lore Master.
God, get up with the lore on Mega Man.
Glad that this happened once in our podcast history.
About Mega Man, of all games.
Yeah, exactly.
That peanut butter is so thin on that sandwich.
And started over to get all the power-ups, only to discover you can replay completed levels. I was able to play back to where I was pretty quickly though, and advance on to the end game. Later, after many failed attempts at the final boss, I closed the game for the night and found out the next day that the password system only saves up to the first Sigma level. So I had to play through those again to finally beat the game. Those critical misassumptions really extended the playtime. Yikes. Despite a lot of unnecessary frustrations, I really did enjoy the game and its design. The bosses were unique and interesting. The controls were simple and expressive, and the secrets were plentiful. But with such a good framework, no wonder they've made over 100 of these games. A couple of takeaways. The boss fight design is deceptively deep. You can learn their patterns to chip away at their health or figure out their weaknesses, which often has a telltale unique animation. Oh, that's good to know. To effectively stun lock them. Probably some mix of the two based on the situation. Learning the easier kills is not cheap. It's necessary to advance in the game. Number two, it's a marathon. Not a sprint. While there's a trick or dominant strategy to every boss. The challenge comes from having to execute those one after another. The final Sigma levels have you fight 15 bosses with minimal breaks and checkpoints. A very brutal gauntlet, but satisfying when you use your acquired knowledge of the fights. I could do without the insta-kill spikes and bottomless pits, though. Yeah, I think we all agree. You can play how you want. Number 3, you can play how you want. There are 9 basic attacks, X-Buster plus 1 extra from each boss, a charge variant for each one, a hidden second level charge shot on top of that. Wow, okay, didn't find that. And also a super secret ultimate attack. Some have specific uses, both in and out of combat, and some are just fun. This huge variety allows for a lot of experimentation, player expression, and replayability, not to mention choosing the order you fight the bosses. And then number 4, this game was made... Oh, calamity. This game was made by jerks. Vertical platforming challenges over bottomless pits with moving platforms and respawning enemies? ? Password systems that don't save your end game progress? ? The emotional turmoil of watching your robot boyfriend Zero sacrifice himself? Spoiler. This is all... Oh, no, you spoiled that already. This is all jerk behavior. Thank you for the great cast, and thanks to the Megaman X devs for a great game. Hope to see you on the stream again soon. Calamity, Nolan.
Yeah, I will agree about the bottomless pits and the respawning enemies and the platforms. Oh my god, because that section getting up to Sigma's base was... Yeah, that was definitely I nearly snapped the plastic controller in two kind of moment for me. I was like, are you kidding me? I had to rewind and I was still annoyed because every step of the way I was like, okay, that was terrible. Should I start over? Like, should I rewind now? Like at every step and that was when I made the jumps. It was brutal, but Calamity makes some good points about the bosses and sort of like learning the strategy. I did find the super power up of the X-Buster probably works on others. I don't remember if I tried it, because that was so 2 weeks ago. But yeah. Anyway,
I still think that there's. I mean, like we talked about on the series, part of Mega Man's legacy, I think, is seen in things like Dark Souls and stuff. I think there's definitely the boss focus, the acquiring of things, anyway.
The Sen's Fortress.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sen's Fortress. Perfect example. That is a freaking Mega Man level. If I've ever seen one.
Yep. I agree. I happened, while you were reading that from Calamity, to check our reviews in the podcast reviews. And so I'm going to read this one because we got one. It's short. There is a question in it, but it is direct to us, so it's actually pretty easy to not answer. The subject is so good, and apparently it's from my real name, but the actual customer name is CBB 2016. So one of our youngest listeners, assuming that's a birth year. Anyway, so good. Great conversations between two seemingly great people about great games. Let's go. For the record, I'm genuine. Tim is seeming. Since they read reviews on the show, can you tell us about what you're currently working on and if the podcast has affected those projects in any way? Signed, my real name. So, Tim.
Oh, man.
I yield that up to you because,
Yeah. Well,
I could get into trouble with my boss. So I'm just gonna let it go.
That old chestnut. No, we can't talk about what we're working on. We are both working at the same company, though, which we started. So that's exciting. We will talk about it someday. I think I am willing to say that the podcast has definitely influenced what we're working on now. Absolutely.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think as an engineer, it's less likely to directly. We tend to talk more about the design stuff. It's like, picking apart the engineering was like, well, the engineering was to support the design. That's not always true. Certainly, there are games that we've discussed where it's like the technology itself was a statement, like Doom, for example. Would be a good example of a thing that's like, or Myst, for that matter. allowed us to do things like, and you look at that game, you're like, that's not a tech heavy game. And it's like, well, yeah, think about making it, making those images at that time. Definitely a technical statement. So yeah, anyway, so, in terms of what I do day to day, probably less so, in that way. But that said, how I think about games is definitely impacted by the conversations we have here, that we've been having here every week for 6.5 years. I don't know how it couldn't be, and of course for us that those discussions go back, another, whatever, 15 years beyond that, to our LucasArts days in particular. So,
yeah, the podcast forces, I mean, we would normally talk about, essentially game theory, whatever you want to say, day to day in our jobs at the office. But we've, I guess, chosen to do this publicly at this point. But the podcast forces me to do that. It's sort of like it's sort of forcing me to do something I've kind of always wanted to do, is like play old games and like really like delve into them. But it's not something, unless you have like some motivator, like you have to put an episode out every week, which Brett does anyway, and I don't do anything. Unless you have some motivator like that, I don't think I ever would have gotten off my butt to do it. Like it makes sense for a game designer to do this, but like it's so time consuming, even just to do the part I'm doing. There's no way I would do it willingly unless I had him yelling at me saying, what are we going to play next? Kind of thing. So it's like, it's sort of in a way.
Those incidentally are the things that you do. Is like, as we're nearing the end of every game, I'm like, yeah, what's up? what next? Because I got nothing, I mean, I sometimes have suggestions, but I'm like, or I'm like, I don't know about that one. We kind of already covered that topic.
Yeah.
And that kind of comes up. But yeah, generally speaking, it's like I let Tim figure out, and I mean, I do have a list of stuff that I draw from that people have sent in and said, hey, you should talk about this someday. But generally it's like, well, we don't want to play what, things that, well, this time we ended up playing the same years, as it turned out, just totally coincidentally, 89 and 93. But
yeah, that's super weird.
But in general, we kind of jump around a lot, and we try to switch genres a lot, or make something topical or what have you. Anyway. Yeah.
Yep.
So all right, I'm going to read one more email, and then we will out, and we'll do the other emails in the future. The subject is random Mega Man 2 stuff I forgot to email after the first Mega Man 2 episode, from Raymond. Hi, DG crew. The emails about Mega Man music, episode 313, part 3 of the Mega Man series, reminded me that I never sent this email about 2 songs from internet culture of yore. Countless Memories and Can't Beat Airman. Countless Memories is a song about childhood and lost youth, set to a remix of the music from Wily's stage, while Can't Beat Airman is an original composition about a Japanese man singing his heart out about not being able to beat Airman. Can recommend both for anyone looking for good songs and a blast from the past. Or maybe it's just a good blast from the past. Anyway, there's a good retrospective on Mega Man 2 that I'll link to. All these links will be in the show notes. It has some dev interviews that goes into how they were on a tight deadline and didn't have enough time for enough playtesting, which is probably what led to things like the metal blades. They cost almost no energy, 1 bar of energy per 4 blades thrown, which means a total of 112 shots before you run out. Can fire 8 directions. They go through walls, and it's the weakness of 3 bosses, including Metal Man himself. It's Metal Man, the obvious first choice, unless you're going out of your way to do something different. I don't really have a point here. Just wanted to go on about the metal blades for a bit. Regards, Raymond.
Yeah.
I mean, sure.
You can spam. That thing is like a machine gun. You're just like...
Yeah. And I did. There were definitely times that I did. In fact, when I was getting... I think you got further than I did in Mega Man 2.
I used it on multiple bosses at the end. Yeah,
I used it in several places when I would just like jam on the thing. I'm like, I got tons of these. Let me just go. And that was, considering what you said about resource usage, was probably not the right thing to do.
Yeah, but, that's what bit me by the end too. I was like, I got these for days. And I was like, oh wait, I can't replenish this now. Oh no.
Yep. Oh, now I'm in trouble. Anyway, thanks for sending those in. Thanks, of course, for your review, CBB 2016. And thanks to Thanks to both of our emails this week. We have more coming. You know what? I'm going to read briefly an email from Mystery Dip. The subject is Magnasanti, and these links will be in the show notes as well. While not SimCity 2000, I thought you'd get a kick out of this old article of what a min-max dystopia looks like in SimCity 3000. And then there's a video as well that he links. That's it. That's the whole email. But I did go and watch this video and saw that and read. I had remembered actually the article, which came out in 2010. But the density of this thing, when you said megacity, whatever that's called, and Dread, it is exactly that. It is these huge towers. Nobody works where they live. It is, and pollution's through the roof. It is, and it just absolutely maximizes the density that you can have in this place. And it is grotesque in its uniformity. And it's okay, this is, the person describes it basically as the high score of the game. And I think if this is the high score of life, I don't want to play anymore. If this is the goal, then we're not pursuing the right goals. So anyway,
it's
definitely an interesting, taking that procedural rhetoric all the way to the end. And this is where you get I don't know that I like it. Anyway, so thanks for sending that in, Mystery Dip. I remembered the article, but I don't think I had seen the video. So it was cool to actually see it, kind of in motion, as it were. Okay. Anyway, so again, thanks for the reviews and email. You can find us on the web at devgameclub.com or on Twitter at devgameclub, where you can also find my co-host at
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
I don't know why I mentioned that I ever Twitch, because I almost never do anymore. You are going to be returning to Dark Souls in a week or two, I'm sure.
Yeah, I will. It's just I need to do some grinding before I can play again on stream, so it's just haven't been having time to do that. So it's planned. I just don't know exactly when yet. So stay tuned, watch Twitter, etc.
Yep. Find it at twitch.tv/Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, commissioned by friend of the cast Aaron Evers, and our logo and our store are by Mark Garcia. Have fun consulting your advisors about the budget this week, and good night.
Good night.
Because that's what everybody wants to do.
Yeah, budgets.
You got to look at the budgets and talk to some advisors. I don't
even want to do my own budget in my life.
I have not done a budget ever.